Okay, there. Do you all see that?
Yes.
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 Okay,
Yes.
that's what I had attached. Um, so let's take a little time to talk about that. And then we'll come back and introduce each other. So, so this is this argument between philosophers, and that's why I said that you had to kind of sense um, uh, Berkeley's uh, the context of Berkeley's thinking. So it's a kind of professional argument going on. And here's John Locke, and he sees a tree in the forest, a tree which is a material object. You know, we would say it's a real tree. It has colors, as you can see, and if you went up to it, you could touch it, and all those senses, which are part of what we see when we look at the tree. So we look at the tree, but we don't see this tree, according to Locke. The tree combined with our eyes and our brain and all of that, we see this image of a tree, which we take to be identical to the real tree, which we can't literally see. And we think at first that this mental representation must be the tree, but there are only certain parts of it, Locke says, that are really in it, and these parts are the ones that we can measure, like extension and motion and weight and so on. These are called primary qualities by Locke, because if we try to determine these qualities, if we did our measurements carefully, we would all end up with the same thing. But it also has, he says, secondary qualities, and these are things that might well vary from individual. We see the tree, and not just by individuals, like people who are colorblind, but people who have only one eye, and so they don't see the perspective, or the tree itself sometimes can be seen in twilight, and sometimes with the rising sun. So these are all in a way subjective, and the same with the colors and the tastes of things. Those can vary from an individual. The smell can vary from individual and the situation. So that's the wrap up of the primary and secondary qualities, and so this is Locke's theory here, all of this. And then Berkeley says this mental representation of the tree is the only thing we can perceive, and on the assumption, essayist Kippy, that is to be perceived, nothing can be perceived. Whatever cannot be perceived must not exist except for other perceivers. So therefore, this material tree doesn't really exist. All that exists is what we see. And so in that sense, he is arguing for our common sense, that as I sit here in front of my computer, I see the computer, and all of you are seeing whatever you are seeing, and that's all that we see. But we really see it, and so all the things that we really see are real. Now, I hope that simplifies Berkeley's argument. some question. Richard, are you speaking?
Well, first of all, going back to Locke for a moment, is there any connection between what Locke is saying here and Plato's ideal forms?
Yeah, there is in a sense. Yeah, those people, those of you who were with me with Plato's Republic, remember that he does the image of people being in a cave, and what they see in the cave is not real. But if they free themselves from the cave and eventually get themselves out of the cave and into the sunshine, then they see the real thing. Yeah, very much like that.
Okay. So he's a Neoplatonist
In that sense,
that
yeah,
sense, anyway. Yeah.
yeah. So this kind of theory, in that sense, is not really new. Goes all the way back to Plato.
Uh, so I have one of a number of confusions here in my mind is uh, whether uh, whether Berkeley is making a distinction between sense and common sense. Uh, I understand sense to be uh, uh, taste, touch, etc. Uh, Physical senses, I suppose. Uh, Common sense, however, seems uh, a more, um, a less, say, scientific term. uh, uh, and I don't necessarily relate that uh, to the senses. And yet, it does seem that Berkeley is more or less eliding them. Uh,
Yeah,
we sense these things, and therefore our common sense tells us that they exist.
yeah. And common sense tells us everything. I mean, in our daily lives, we never stop to ponder, oh, is this real? In our daily lives, we go about and we buy groceries, and we greet other people. We have friends if we're fortunate, um, and so on. We eat, and we either eat at home, or if you have a lot of money and time, you go out to a restaurant, and you never question the reality, and that's common sense.
Right. So he's rescuing common sense from the philosophers, the metaphysicians.
Yes.
Of course, you could argue that it really didn't require rescuing because for 99.9% of the population, it wasn't a problem. They, they saw what they saw. they they uh, they believed they were seeing what they were seeing.
Right.
And so this is really kind of an esoteric argument among philosophers, isn't it? Uh,
Uh, well, uh, a good many philosophers don't agree, even in his own time. He actually he first wrote a book called The Principles of Knowledge, and that one drew a lot of negative response. So he wrote this dialogue to make it simpler for people to understand his position. And he's such a good writer. He wrote another dialogue before this, and he's the only person who's really good at writing these dialogues besides Plato and Hume. Hume has a very good dialogue where uh, he has three or four people arguing about perception.
mhm.
But so Hylas, three dialogues of Hylas and Philotas are are kind of simplified versions.
Okay.
Uh,
So
okay.
you say that philosophers wouldn't agree that this was simply a restatement of what to most people is obvious, because to them it isn't obvious. It needs to be proven. But uh, again, that's still that is still a very select group of people who have chosen to spend their days thinking about things that are of no consequence to.
Sure. Yeah, that's what philosophers are all about.
Thank, thank,
By
and
and large, somebody calls them armchair philosophers or armchair thinkers. They sit in their study, in their armchair or whatever they have, and they think about things. And
right.
so they've got to be,
So the rest of us don't have to.
excuse me?
So the rest of us don't have to,
Well, yeah, you not only don't have to, but you also don't normally.
or want to. Yes.
You've got to have free time. If you go all the way back to the ancients, um, the very first philosopher is like Thales is held to be the first philosopher in Western thinking, and he must have been wealthy to be able to have the time to think about this. And then he thought, "Gee, I think everything is water." And somebody else comes along and says, "Oh, I don't think that. I think everything is fire," and so on. And so these guys, and they're all guys. They're not women. The women are busy having children and taking care of them, and so no women have the free time until much, much, much later. So yeah, these are philosophers mostly think about things that have no consequence, except probably moral philosophy.
Well, all right. I don't.
I,
I've said enough. Thank you.
I would add into that group theoretical physicists.
Who was that? Was that Mike?
Yeah, this is right. In other words, if you think about the people who think of things that never occur to us or certainly never worry us, I would add into that group theoretical physicists as well as philosophers.
Yeah.
When you get into theoretical physics, such things as string theory and many others, it's not your average guy on the street or woman on the street does not worry about how many dimensions there are in quantum mechanics.
Right.
Yeah.
No, no, of course not. And yet you could argue that that what they do is actually adding something to an understanding, if not our understanding, of the universe, of how it works, how the physical elements that surround us actually are composed and how they work.
But one might argue, Richard, that those theories are all tentative.
Of course, yeah.
Even Einstein's theory, which seemed to be proved when they figured out how the sun affected the existence of the light from the stars or whatever it was that he did. Even when that got proved, that had to be only still just a theory.
Sure.
Because
That is the scientific method,
Yeah.
which seems somewhat different from the philosophic method, which relies not upon, I don't know, measurement and empirical data to create a theory, but rather on argumentation, words, wordsmithing to make a persuasive case.
Yeah, that's partly so, but Berkeley could argue, and Locke too. They argue that what they're doing is also empirical. So philosophical physics or physical theory is a different kind of empiricism. But Locke and Berkeley are classed as empiricists too. In fact, if you take the undergraduate and certainly graduate courses in philosophy, traditionally there was a course in continental rationalists, which were Descartes and Spinoza and Leibniz, versus in the same time frame, roughly, the British empiricists. And the British empiricists are Locke first, and then Berkeley, and then Hume, and then Kant.
Not Hobbes.
Kant is trying to bridge the two of them.
Mm-hmm. The impact of Locke and Hobbes on the world is easily seen. Locke's political theories comprised the basis of the American experiment, and can that be said of Berkeley's empiricism, that it has been influential in any practical sense?
Well, he wrote a book called, what is it called? Anyway, the title includes the word vision, and he really was studying the eye and the differences in the eye, and research means, he was very wrong on some points, but he certainly contributed to further understanding of how the eye operates. Mm-hmm. And so in that sense, there was a carryover by him.
Hey, Forrest, this is Trina. I've got a call scheduled in a few minutes. Do you want me to help you take this diagram down so you guys can all see each other?
No, I'll just move it off to the side.
Well, if you should see a stop share button at the top. So,
oh, okay.
If you do that, then it'll go back to everybody being able to see faces bigger.
I see the share button. That turns into a stop share. Oh no, I see it way at the top. Yeah.
Yeah, it's at the top.
Okay. Thanks for your help, Trina.
No problem.
We'll do something during the week to get things better set up.
Oh, no worries. I can always get on and walk through it.
Yeah. Thanks, Trina.
Okay, back to Locke and Hobbes. You want to keep looking at this thing that took
Boris,
to do? Lance,
I have a question. Yeah. Would Berkeley be considered a radical empiricist as opposed to just a plain old empiricist? Because
plain old.
But he seems to deny the existence of matter in its totality.
Yeah.
And
exactly.
I mean, isn't that kind of a radical view of it all?
Okay, if you mean that, yes. Yeah.
I mean, and then he.
On the other hand, what Mike Davis said before about the physicists these days, they're radical in that sense too. When we look at the tree, for them, the tree is made up of atoms and molecules and things like that.
Yes, but they admit of the existence of some kind of matter which we are perceiving in a certain way based on our lives, experiences, ancestry, etc. But
you are just saying what Berkeley says.
But I'm trying not to, believe me.
This is where I think this is the crux of what some of us are struggling with here.
Yeah.
I can understand how Berkeley is an advance over Locke, or at least closer to common sense. But then when he denies the existence of matter,
Yeah.
what is that all about? As if matter only exists because we perceive it?
Yes.
Yes.
Uh,
His,
so matter requires human perception in order to exist?
yes.
No. He says God perceives.
Well,
And doesn't that then bring into the existence everything that we know is in existence?
That just sounds like he's circling back to Plato and
but it,
Okay, but
ideal.
then
but God has a mind. It's
we'll see
mind.
the in some ways, can we let that hang, Richard?
Yes.
Because that comes up then in the second and third dialogue.
All right. I don't want to. I'm not there yet. So
Yeah. So the first dialogue, he's really mostly talking about this thing that I made up.
mhm.
So, but that's a real question. You know, he's talking about what all of us what all of us believe as we function in our lives, and how we actually function is by these images that we have. We don't have any image of matter. You know, if I ask you now, what kind of image do you have of matter?
Well, matter is a generic term that I would say I would argue could simply include every natural or created object. So
Yeah, but
everything
yeah,
that takes up space, everything that occupies
right.
space.
That's what Berkeley says. That's what Berkeley says.
Well, one form of matter would be one form of that matter would be a tree. Why doesn't that make the tree exist?
Berkeley challenges you, and in the first dialogue, he keeps challenging Hylas to tell him, you know, think about matter, and what do you think about? You don't get something that you can touch or feel or see or any of those things. Matter is just, as I said up here, is a word that signifies nothing.
Or signifies everything.
Well, can you think of everything?
Well, no, but everything that I can think of in the material in the world that I call the material world is a form of matter. Is it?
You don't have to call it the material world. Everything that you think of in the world exists.
Yes.
Because you think of it. And other people think of it too. Other people aren't walking around in the grocery store asking, is this apple real?
No, they're not.
Pineapple real?
I doubt that.
Pizza real?
No, I don't think so.
People don't do that. When I was a story I want to tell, I've told Mike Davis this. When I took up graduate study in philosophy, I had 2 undergraduate courses, which is practically nothing. I mean, one was symbolic and I forget what we call it. I just lost the expression, but anyway, social knowledge, and then the other, and I virtually flunked that course. They gave me a C minus, which at Harvard is a F, and the other course I had was something about great ideas in the Enlightenment, and so I struggled through that and did okay. So that's all that I had. And had an English major, and I was teaching. I had an appointment at Stetson University to teach English. And then I realized that philosophy really sounded much more interesting to me. And so I applied to a lot of schools, got accepted at quite a number of them, chose the Hopkins because Hopkins gave me a grant, gave me free tuition. I still have the GI Bill of Rights, the GI Bill thing, and so I had enough to live on, and so I went to Hopkins. Well, in my first week at Hopkins, I went out for coffee with other graduate students. It was a kind of a tradition to go to the dining hall right next door to our building, and where you had a break. And so the first day, as far as I can remember, one philosophy student who had a major at Michigan, I think, held up his cup of coffee and said, "How do we know that this is a real cup of coffee?" And I thought, that's pretty absurd. All you need to do is go out and check with the people who make coffee and say, you know, how do you make this? And they show me the coffee that they have. So I said that, and this guy said, well, how do you know it's a cup? And I said, you just look at it. Of course, it's a cup. And they pressed me, and I said, well, we all have an idea of a cup. And one older philosophy student, that is one who had more study, a graduate student with more study, I was the oldest, leaped at me practically and said, what do you mean by idea? And I said, idea, you know, we all know what an idea is. And this guy said, do you mean a Lockean idea? Do you mean a Cartesian idea? Do you mean a Humean idea? Do you mean a Platonic idea? And I didn't know what he was talking about because I hadn't studied any of this stuff.
Well, and you stuck it out.
And I stuck it out, and I learned to pretend that those philosophers really were on the ball when I was teaching.
Or when he talked about the perception in that first dialogue you were looking at, I didn't look at it in great detail. Only picked it up the last couple of days. When he talked about senses, when he talked about if your one hand is warm, one hand is cold, and you put it in a bucket of water, it'll have a different sense of what the water temperature is.
Right.
Those were things that were fascinating to me, and when I was reading that yesterday and today, how we see things differently. Last night we were out to dinner with friends, and the person at their friend's house for dinner, and they prepared some gingerbread, and half the people liked the gingerbread, and I thought it was god awful.
Yeah.
What is the difference in taste and things like that? Is that material? Is that sense? Is that what Richard was talking about? Is that how do you determine matter in those things? And the perception of matter being so different was a little bit of what I took away from the discussion.
Oh, okay. Well, what Berkeley would say is those two hands actually exist because you see them and they feel differently because they are feeling differently. And all those sensations give you something that's real, but you don't have to bring matter into it. You have all these sensations of your hands here, and there's nothing like the real hand that exists. It's your hand that exists. There's not some real hand up in the sky.
Well, we can, okay.
Lance, why don't you jump in before Richard?
Well, I was going to say, you know, if you put a piece of toast in the toaster and you wait 4 or 5 minutes, leave the room and come back, and it's really toasted or maybe burnt, it appears that the toast had existence without its being perceived by anyone.
Yeah.
the toaster itself can't perceive. So there must be some substance there, something's there.
Yeah.
Even if you're not feeling, touching, or looking at it.
Yeah. Well, we'll come to that later.
Okay. I mean, but I think Berkeley was saying is that God was watching that piece of toast.
Yeah. We won't. We'll come to that later.
Toast later. Okay.
I have a question about the hand experiment, the cold and the hot. And my question was, even though the one hand feels hot in comparison to the water temperature, and the other hand feels cold, the water temperature is still the same. So it doesn't really change the temperature of the water. How do you deal with those discrepancies?
Well, you get up from where your hands are placed differently. You get up and you've got a big thermometer in the kitchen, and you go and you look, and it says 74. Oh, Mark, you're muted, Mark. You're still muted. Mark, we can't hear you. There you go.
Okay. One perception is still that it's hotter, and the other perception is that it's colder. So what is the reality according to Berkeley at that point?
What is the reality of what, Mark?
Of what the temperature is.
Oh,
Is it hot, cold, or is it the actual temperature?
well, you know that you feel differently. So the temperature for the right hand is either higher or lower than the temperature for the left hand.
All right.
By temperature, you mean simply one feels hotter and the other one feels colder.
Right. But then Berkeley would accept that the water temperature itself does not change,
Now,
even though the perception is different.
yeah, if you wanted to know the room temperature, as I said, you go to look at your thermometer.
Okay. So that's not necessarily perception dependent.
Yeah. I don't understand why you aren't willing to just use your common sense, all of you.
Well, I think I am using common sense, and I'm trying to figure out whether I'm using it the way Berkeley says I should or not.
That's exactly my question too.
Yeah.
Uh,
Okay. Well,
to me, common.
I'll just repeat what I said before. You go to the grocery store, and you don't. You come up, do a poll of all the people who are at Harris Teeter, let's say, and ask them what they are shopping for, and they'll give you their shopping list, and none of them say, "Oh, I'm shopping for a bit of matter."
Well, first of all, matter is an English word. There are, thousands of other ways of translating it into other languages.
Sure.
So I don't want to get too hung up on matter as a noun.
Well, put it in some other language to put it in.
Well, I don't. I don't know. You keep coming back and telling us that since we can't see matter, matter doesn't exist.
Right.
All right, matter doesn't exist. That doesn't change anything, does it?
No, it doesn't. We don't, as I said, we don't go.
So that's the great insight here, that matter does not exist.
Matter does not.
Trees exist, tables exist,
Right.
cereal exists, but matter doesn't exist.
Right. This is everyday common sense, except some people have been kind of taken in by the propaganda that there is something called matter.
Oh, okay.
You
Well,
stop to press those people in the grocery store. You,
I'll bet those
that-
people have never seen the inside of a grocery store. I don't think you're going to run into too many of them, but okay. I mean,
Yeah,
matter doesn't
okay. There are
exist.
people who never get there. Certainly, the slaves in our country most of them never got to a grocery store unless they were shopping for their master.
Mhm. Well, right, okay.
This is
I
just
think
common.
Harris Teeter may be a poor example. I think at Growls, I've seen people shopping for matter.
Say that again, Glenn.
At Growls, I believe I've seen people shopping for matter.
I missed that.
Growls here in St. Michael's.
Wow. Okay.
What is that, a garden center or something?
What? Oh, I'm sorry, you're out of state, Richard.
Yes.
That's our only grocery store here in St. Michael's, Maryland. It's a small grocery.
And they sell matter.
It's
Okay.
not nearly as upscale as Harris Teeter, where everything obviously is labeled and is not matter. But here, there's more general things. They're scattered on tables and the like. So.
Uh-huh.
Okay. We'll grant that. It's just common sense that I'm arguing for.
I think everybody here is willing to embrace the argument for common sense. The issue is whether Berkeley embraces common sense.
Uh-huh. I think that you embrace it.
If I
It seems a long way to go to make a
Okay,
point.
Ron.
I was just going to say, maybe I misunderstood this. I've read it a couple times, but it's my sense that what Berkeley is arguing, the sense of matter that he's arguing against, is this Lockean sense that that trees and everything else have an aspect that is quantifiable and that is atomic and is mechanical, this primary set of attributes, which are different from the attributes that we appreciate when we perceive something, internalize these the effects of these primary attributes on our sensibilities, on our brains, and add color and smell and impressions, even poetic allusions to our perception of a tree, for example. And that it's in this sense of there being a separation between something which is ontologically primary and something which is added by virtue of our sensibility. It's that separation in Locke that he's arguing against. So it's matter in the Lockean sense that he's saying does not exist. That the only thing that exists commonsensically is what we perceive.
Yes.
And the philosophers insist on the separation, Locke, Descartes, etc. And his argument is that this bifurcation of perception is simply incorrect, that it's unnecessary, that it has no standing either logically or commonsensically and needs to be dismissed.
Yes. Right on. Now, this perception, he'll agree, includes not only it can only exist for us perceivers because we have eyes and we have a brain. And actually, Berkeley is living in a time that historians will call the period of enlightenment. That he's existing in a time when science is just beginning. It's just in its babyhood. Philosophers who think about those things are not called scientists yet. That doesn't even come in until later. They're called natural philosophers. That is, they are thinking about nature, and in thinking about nature, they think not only that there are these trees and all sorts of other things that we see, but there is also that can't occur unless we have eyes and a brain and so on, that all of which processes this and gives us this mental representation. So you were giving a good summary of Berkeley's view.
So would Berkeley say that a human being who is born blind and, let us say, impaired physically,
Yes.
confined to a room, never goes out, never has no perception, literally no perception of a tree?
Well, no.
Well, let me finish. Would for that person a tree does not exist?
Okay.
Okay.
No, because for that person can touch the tree, can put her arms around the tree. She can carve off a bit of bark and smell it and feel it, and she can pick up some leaves from the ground,
Right.
and so on.
But what if she can't do any of those things?
Well, that's impossible. Then she's dead.
No,
Talking about a cadaver.
she's profoundly handicapped, and cannot perceive the tree. That's all.
Well, she's a baby because other people can see her as a baby, but she's born with this terrible, terrible handicap, a Helen Keller.
Yeah, but I'm thinking of an even more profoundly handicapped person who simply has no conception of a tree, of the object we call a tree, because she has never experienced it. She has never seen it, smelled it, touched it, or any of the other senses.
Oh, sure.
She's never been able to use any sense to perceive the tree. So for her, that tree there is no concept of a tree. A tree does not exist in that person's mind.
Richard, I think Berkeley
For
would,
she is a dead person.
Well, okay.
I think Berkeley would argue that ideas, including ideas of trees, can affect the imagination, the logical deduction, the inferences that the spirit makes. That one spirit, another who might write a book about trees, can converse with another spirit who may be blind and unable to see trees, but can hear descriptions and can have someone read to them from the book about trees, and so understand trees in that sense to exist.
Wonderful,
And-
wonderful,
I'm sorry.
wonderful.
Yeah.
What
Anyway.
you're saying is wonderful.
Yeah. Well, I think, this is one of the ways in which Berkeley is building the case for all of the circumstances where our naive and natural sensibilities fail us, and still we need and indeed take assurance that a world still exists out there that's full of trees and full of desks and full of all the items on the shelves of Grawls, etc.
Yeah.
And that integrator is God. It's another spirit, larger in scope, unconstrained by the limitations of sense, but able to fill in the blanks, as it were, where our own sensibilities fail, where they fail on an individual basis.
Uh-huh.
So he's setting the stage in the first dialogue for that argument in the second, I think.
Yep.
And so, I mean, these pieces begin to fit together after the thrust of the first dialogue is to undercut this Lockean and Cartesian sense that, we live in a world of billiard balls and bright
Very tiny ones.
bronze. I'm sorry,
Very tiny ones.
little tiny ones, little atoms,
Yeah.
and that somehow they energize our sensibilities, and then our sensibilities with that stimulus do the creative work of coloring in the rest of the picture that comes to us in the coloring book. We put in the purples and the greens and the yellows out of our imagination and previous experience and
Okay.
and the legacy of our culture. But anyway, it seems to me that that there is, in addition to the what shall I say, the debunking of one point of view, there's a coherence and an integrity to what Berkeley is building. I mean, he isn't just destructive in the first. He may be mostly destructive in the first dialogue, but as his philosophical structure emerges and comes into full picture in the second and third, he's building something, and it has integrity, and it's. I'm sorry, please.
Yeah. No. Okay. Doing a good summary. Let me just cut you off for other people. Lance?
Yeah, I was going to say that I think his philosophical structure is some type of a grand circle. It just, it goes around and around, and he attempts to justify everything ultimately by putting God into it as the great perceptor. Of course, it could be Alexa today rather than God if he wanted to. I mean, anything that can perceive. But the example of the handicapped person who is being spoken to by a friend. If you take Berkeley, when that friend leaves the room, that friend ceases to exist. Yet we all know that person, walked back home, took a bus back home, took a cab back home. They didn't cease to exist.
And how do we know that?
We know that because we have common sense, just like you've been saying.
Yeah, it's that you have common sense. You can imagine you no longer can see that friend of yours, but the other people can see that friend. Leave your house and get on the bus and go away, and then that person no longer sees your friend, but the bus driver does, and other people who are in the bus, and so your friend keeps on being perceived, but by different people.
Well, let's say there's nobody on the street but my friend, and he's
Right.
not being perceived by anyone on the way home.
Right.
But Berkeley then is going to tell me, or what I got from reading this, which I read more than once, is that God is there to be the perceiver.
Right.
If there is no individual present to perceive.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah, we're not going to. I asked people earlier to put that off until later because that comes up later.
So be it.
Fran, if you want to speak, you need to unmute. Maybe you don't want to.
I decided that today I was going to be a patient listener because I've never participated in a discussion like this. So I just want to get a feel for it all.
Sure, okay. That's a good option. And let's see, I have, who is it? Oh. You're all thinking. Annabelle, you are muted. Maybe you want to be. And
I have not much to
is
add.
the other Gregory here? The other Thompson?
I'm here.
Yeah. And what's your name again?
My first name is Ruth.
Excuse me?
Ruth.
Ruth. Oh, that's right. Ruth.
Yes.
Yep.
And Fran is my sister, actually. We decided to do this together because we felt like it was a course that we've been looking for. So, but again, for me, it's also a first time, and I am enjoying the discussion. It's I've actually gotten a few chuckles out of it, and just waiting to see sort of where you go next.
Okay. This is a very hard. In some ways, it seems to be an easy read, but this is a very hard question. And this is a very hard class.
If a tree falls in the forest, and no one hears it, does it make a sound?
That's exactly what I was thinking just 2 seconds ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
I mean, there'd be no tree to make a sound. The tree wouldn't be there.
The tree wouldn't be there?
Unless God.
That was that Bob? Bob, was that you speaking?
Not getting to God.
Right.
Well, I said that's an issue we have to put off till later. Today we're wrestling with issues of the very first dialogue.
I would like to, I want to raise an issue of a bad argument in Berkeley. This is Mike.
Yeah, oh, Mike, there we go, over in the corner.
Yeah, he, just reading him and forgetting the issue of God, he, in his discussion of heat and cold and pain, he mixes up intentionally. He assumed, well, how to put it? Pain is in our minds. I don't think anyone in this group would deny that. I mean, there's plenty of evidence that pain is in our mind.
Yeah, excuse me. What do you mean by in your mind?
Well, in other words, if I'm dead, oh God, I feel like pain exists as a perception.
Yes, yeah. I have a great deal of pain if you see me squirming around.
Right.
As I have terrible pain around my waist and my legs and so on. So I try to relieve it at times. And it's not in my mind. I can tell you where the pain is. And it's not in my mind. It's right here in my back and side.
Well, Forrest, I could be Berkeley and say, how do you know you have a back?
Because I can feel it. I put my hand around there, and there it is.
True, but you have to understand that you can be fooled by that, and unless there's God, you don't know you have a back.
Well,
all you're feeling is a sensation of pressure on your hand.
Yeah.
And you don't even know you have a hand.
But my pain doctor has arranged for me tomorrow afternoon to have CAT scans, 2 CAT scans of my spine. And so I'm going to go in, and the people there will see my spine, and they'll see my back. They won't see my spine. They'll see my back, and they will put me down in different positions and so on. So they're seeing it.
Well, they won't see your pain, though.
They don't see my pain, no.
No, they don't see it.
Yeah. And Forrest, science, this is Mark, science says that pain comes from your brain. The perception of the pain is from your brain.
Yeah.
And the way painkillers, some of them work, is they break that connection, so you no longer perceive the pain,
Right.
even though your condition might generate that, but the brain doesn't transmit the feeling of pain.
Right.
I
I
think
don't know
it's
if I
safe to
explained that
say,
well, but
I think it's safe to say, Forrest, that all here feel your pain.
Well,
Oh.
we may not feel it, but we see it.
I could claim that pain is mental, for lack, without getting into definitions of mental, but heat is not. See, that's where Berkeley equates heat and pain as the same thing. To me, that is begging the question. He's already assuming that heat and pain are the same thing in order to make his argument. Heat is in the flame, not in my sensation. And you say, well, how I would define heat as very active atoms. Heat is a measure of the vibrations of atoms. That has nothing to do with me. Now you can say, and so I just see Berkeley kind of begging the question when he's arguing that heat and pain are the same thing.
Well, what if the heat is so intense that it's actually burning one hand?
That's pain.
And yeah, it's painful and it's heat, both.
Heat,
If it's lukewarm, then there's no
Well,
pain.
the heat is the cause and the pain is the result. It's the human sensation that results from the application of heat.
And
Those-
heat,
Well, all that you're saying is that those two go together in some cases, and in some other cases they don't go together. And you don't know anything about the cause, except that, going back to what Mark said before, there are scientists who are dealing with these issues, and the ones who are called brain scientists, they actually can determine by the various places that they put the whatever they're called. They can talk about brain functions in ways that we can't. At least I can't.
but one difference is heat can be measured. We have ways of measuring it. Pain, we really can't measure.
Okay. What? Yeah. What we're asked when we see the pain doctor or our spouses or whoever, what's your pain level today from 1 to 10? That's always the question.
And
you say,
that's entirely subjective. It's not an objective measurement like a thermometer will give you on the heat.
right. So the thermometer would be, what the thermometer would give you would be, when you go to see your primary doctor or nurse, the first thing that happens besides your weight, and there you get a specific number from on the scales, and then your temperature is taken. So that's a kind of measurement, and doctor says, she says, this is what I get 98.7, and check it out, my assistant. And the assistant says, oh, I get the same thing, 98.7. So that's kind of objective, yes.
It's measurable.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I think
But what measurable means is that in that context is that you have some kind of instrument that can give you a figure.
Hmm.
But I think I agree with Mike that that distinction is not made very clearly, if it's made at all, by Berkeley between heat and and between the cause and the effect, as it were, heat and pain, the sensation that one gets from heat.
Oh, and Richard,
I don't know just where the cause is.
well, you don't, Richard had raised, well, the whole issue of causation
Yes.
is in a way very difficult to deal with concerning Berkeley. I mean, we think uh, we think lightning. Well, if what is causation if we have a perception A, a perception B, and a perception C, and all we have is these bazillion perceptions going on, yet for some reason we believe one perception causes another? Or
Yeah.
what does that to me makes no
That's
sense in Berkeley's world?
Yeah, there's
well,
no,
that's science. That's the science that has succeeded Berkeley. You know that we understand a lot more about
yes.
causation because of scientific measurement and
Right.
observation. But there's still a distinction to be made between causes and effects. I'm not sure where that. I was just agreeing with Mike's point. I thought I should be agreeable for once.
Okay.
I think it's in the first dialogue that Berkeley celebrates, endorses the work of Newton. Was certainly quite a remarkable set of developments in that era. And this fundamental concept of gravitation is in fact only measurable, only detectable through inferences from other phenomenon. It can't be perceived directly. I mean, we can see apples fall. We can see the planets circling the sun if we use telescopes and other instruments. But it's not the same direct perception that Berkeley's talking about. So there is inferential knowledge. It's knowledge about phenomenon and the causal relationship between phenomenon that comes to us through this process of hypothetical extrapolation and then testing the logical consequences of those hypotheses. And he seems to endorse that, but it seems to be to run contrary to his essential proposition that the only thing that exists is what we perceive directly.
No, not
Sorry.
that's incorrect.
Okay.
Because you know, by his time the telescope has now been around for a while,
Yes.
and people can look through the telescope and they can finally see what the surface of the moon looks like. That is to say that they can perceive the moon differently than they did before. But that's then it's still an immediate sensation, but it's modified by looking through those lenses. He's going to include everything that we perceive indirectly in that way.
Forrest, I don't want to put words in Ron's mouth, but
Please go ahead.
you can tell me I'm totally misconstruing what you're saying. But we believe gravity is real.
Right.
And just as we believe matter is real, getting over the verbal issues of the word matter. But there's no perception of gravity. None.
Right.
We infer it.
Right. Yeah. So gravity doesn't exist.
Oh, that's what I mean. That leads, quote, common sense to believe that gravity doesn't exist, which it seems to me would lead to our very immediate deaths if we decided not to act on the belief that gravity exists.
Yeah, I long ago thought that gravity didn't exist. I think it was even before I took any philosophy courses, but it was especially after I took philosophy courses. When people talk about gravity, they are simply talking about a certain activity that they can see, that when people jump up in the air, they come back down to the earth, to the floor again, and so on. If you throw a ball up in the air, eventually it comes down. If you throw a ball a certain way and twist your wrist, it curves out there, and so you defeat the other team in playing baseball. And that's all that you perceive, and we never perceive gravity. Gravity is a kind of nickname that we have for covering all events of this sort.
Well,
I ask you all to try to think about gravity. Think what gravity is.
But how do astronauts feel about that when they're training in their chambers? Isn't that a feeling that they have?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
When astronauts train, like in their chambers.
Yes.
Isn't that a feeling that they have?
Yeah, they're floating around.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's different than when they were outside the chamber.
Yes.
So
right. Yeah.
The common person isn't going to ever experience that, but they have something that we haven't experienced. Right. Isn't that gravity?
No, it's just that that's the way they experience things when they get far enough away from the Earth.
Okay.
They don't perceive gravity up there in their astronaut chambers.
They perceive
that they float around, and we've got to be very careful not to bump into
the absence of it.
And they've got to have some special things for urinating.
Yeah.
Right.
And the like.
Gravity, when I say gravity exists, gravity has some status other than just a cluster of my perceptions. It is Einstein. Gravity is the bending of space and time. It's something. Now, if it isn't, and it's something that I view as external to me, I cannot imagine myself not having gravity. I can't float up in the air right now because I want to imagine it. So whatever the word exists means, and then we can go down a whole of that. Gravity is important. It's significant.
It's not just
a random.
It's the law.
Yeah, it's the law. It's not a random series of perceptions.
It's misnamed the mall. The law. Excuse me. It's misnamed the law of gravity. It's something. What that means is that there are these regularities. If you throw a ball, or if the apple drops from the tree, another philosophical story. And when you jump up, you come down, and all that stuff. That all exists. But you don't need to say, "Oh, that's gravity."
I just watched a wonderful movie again, Interstellar, which I'm sure most have seen. And in that movie, the central concept involves gravitational time dilation, so that the heavier, the stronger the gravitational field, the slower time passes. And the two are inextricably tied together I think, through most science now, but certainly that is the concept that's expressed in that movie. And so whether there's gravity or whether it's time, that becomes a question. Uh, I, for one, do not deny the existence of gravity, however.
Well,
Very pro-gravity.
as we should all be. But what doesn't commons Newton, whatever gravity is or isn't, Newton, it existed before Newton gave it a name, and experimented.
What existed?
Hmm?
What
What?
existed? What existed?
The physical effects, the physical phenomena that we now term gravity.
And what were they?
I can't tell you what they were, but they are all the things that we've been talking about here.
Well, before we had we knew more.
I would say that no. My point is that that we were aware of the effects of gravity, of the thing that we now call gravity. It hadn't been codified. It hadn't been experimented with as Newton and others have done.
And what do you mean by the effects of gravity?
That I can't explain that in scientific terms. I'm agreeing with all of the observations that you were making about jumping up and coming down, and people have been doing that since the beginning of time. This is a minor point, though, that what Newton did was to begin giving something that had been observed a name.
Yeah, that's what it is, a name.
That's a name, okay. But common sense tells us that this thing which is named gravity, this phenomenon, this physical phenomenon, exists. It doesn't exist on Mars or the moon, but it exists on Earth, and that seems to me to be an application of common sense. If the key words today are common sense, then the application of common sense is simply to try to, as Newton did, and as I said before, codify this thing that we know exists, but we haven't studied in any detail. So
so there are ways in which common sense is quite mistaken.
Oh, now I don't think this is one of them.
Well, if you ask somebody at the grocery store, what is gravity? And that person I would say, what are you talking about? Give me some examples. Well, you throw a ball up in the air, you jump, all those things.
Yeah.
That's all the person can say.
But
the person says gravity is causing all these things.
This is
confusing. I would say, well, what do you mean by gravity? And then they would give examples.
This is
all which are perceivable.
All of which are common sense.
Well, that's where I said common sense isn't always right. Yeah.
But in this case, it is. You throw an apple up at the grocery store and it's going to come down.
Yeah, that's common sense.
That's what I mean.
You're going to have to pay for that apple.
Isn't what we're really talking about is being consciously aware as opposed to unconsciously? In other words, before Newton, we felt gravity. We weren't conscious of it. But when Newton came along, he was able to measure it and have some sort of description for it.
Yeah.
So it's something that now we know about, and whether we're conscious about feeling it or not, there is an effect on us. So there is a perception of gravity.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know, from Berkeley's perspective, does he accept that as existing or not existing?
Well, Berkeley would say what you mean by a perception of gravity is all those examples, and what's the point of repeating them? Throwing the ball, jumping up and down, and so on. That's what the person would have to say.
And actually David Hume would say the same thing.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, there is a scientific way of stating this, and I can't do it, having to do with weight and so forth. I mean, something drops because it weighs it. One thing drops and another thing doesn't. Another thing floats. Okay, the difference is gravity.
It's the difference between a ball and a feather.
Yes. Okay. So that thing that we are describing, forget about calling it gravity for the moment, but just it's a physical phenomenon.
Yes.
Uh,
Perceivable. Yeah.
Perceivable. Earth is not. We know now it's Earth centric, but still, we're here. So that our something, it seems to me something exists. Common sense says that something exists, something is real.
But we're just going in a circle here. I come back and say what exists, and then we talk about these examples, jumping up and down, and so on.
Well, it's not the examples that exist, it's the physical phenomenon that exists of objects in space, objects, force, mass, et cetera, et cetera. It just as a tree can exist, it seems to me a physical phenomenon, the one that we call gravity, can exist because we can.
Gravity isn't a physical phenomenon. The jumping and throwing the ball and all that stuff, those are physical phenomena. But gravity, I ask you again, think about what gravity is.
Well, I've forgotten my
general
science.
Utter the words that Richard keeps repeating and repeating and repeating because he wants that name to mean something other than what common sense says, and common sense has been corrupted into our believing this.
Gravity.
Who was it? Marx talked about the unconscious. Well, he's the first one to raise that, and there are a lot of people who believe that the unconscious does not exist because you can't be conscious. You can't be conscious of it. But then there are a lot of people who believe that it does exist. But all that means is that if you go to the psychiatrist or the psychoanalyst, long enough, and you pay enough money for months of that, the psychoanalyst will help you to see things that you have forgotten about how you were abused as a child.
Well, a lot of people would say my consciousness doesn't exist.
A lot of people would.
Forrest, let me ask you this before we break camp. What's the standing of Berkeley among philosophers today? Is he is he coming back into favor? Are there other philosophers who have attached themselves to bits and pieces of his thinking and extended it? Are there has he simply been thrown in the waste paper basket of ancient philosophy, and is he completely disregarded now by people who are active and creative in the discipline?
Yes, good question. And I would say nobody reads Berkeley anymore, except the people who are philosophy majors or getting a PhD. They might have taken a course of the British empiricists along the way, and then there are people who are reckless enough to sign up for this course. And you won't find a great many other.
An endangered and rapidly diminishing species here.
Who didn't have the common sense to take a course on Chesapeake flowers or whatever.
I must tell the newcomers, and next week we'll introduce each other. We had this bad start today, but the people who have taken courses from me have never found me speaking this much. I usually ask a question and sit back and then talk, but I've been very actively involved in this discussion in ways that to an extent that I not normally are not. But you can see that I've had to be active because you are all resisting so much, and I'm trying to swing you over. And that's not easy because you are pretty wedded to those beliefs.
You're being a gadfly.
I'm not even sure what beliefs you think I for one am wedded to, but okay, let's move on.
Gadfly.
I thought I was confused when I started, but nothing compared to now.
Good. Good. Did somebody say that thinking hard begins with confusion? What Socrates used to do was to try to bring people to the extent where they suddenly said, well, geez, I don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about virtue. You've shown me how wrong I am. So where do we go from here? Socrates, unfortunately, mostly didn't give an answer to that. He wanted the other person to do heavy work.
And you're the same, right?
That's right.
Be careful, Forrest. Remember, they killed Socrates.
That's why we're on Zoom.
They took him off Zoom.
It's safe here.
Stay away from the hemlock.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're kind of moving toward the end, I think. Well, maybe we can introduce each other. Let's see. Let's start with Mike Richard Mayman, because he's been around and
Been around. I'm a retired political scientist. I live in Portland, Maine.
okay. Ron?
Well, I'm retired from the World Bank. I was the supply chain advisor there, worked in more than 100 countries for 30 years.
Mike Davis?
I'm retired from almost 40 years with the Navy managing shipbuilding programs. But prior to that, I was a professional philosopher, an assistant professor of philosophy at Washington College right here on the Eastern Shore.
Okay. Annabelle?
retired physical therapist and just interested in thoughts and so forth. And I do more listening than talking on these.
Ruth? Ruth? Oh, you're muted. Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I was trying to get it unmuted. I'm a retired hospital pharmacist, and just am interested in doing things outside of that box.
Okay. Mark?
Yes, I'm a retired from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. I was in IT security, and I'm just trying to figure out what philosophy is all about and what my own philosophy is.
Okay. I had tried to urge Mark to take some previous courses, and I'm so pleased that he finally has come to us.
Well, I'm looking for common sense. So.
Okay. Lance?
Yes, I'm a 90% retired attorney. I just wanted to let you know I bought a new webcam just for your course, Forrest, because I want to be perceived, and I want to be perceived in the highest possible resolution that we're capable of now.
You've never been clearer, Lance. Clearer.
Thank you.
Oh, you're wonderful. Fran? Yeah, you're muted, Fran. Yeah.
Hi, I'm retired as well, and
From what?
I worked in accounting and finance for physicians' offices and hospital.
Mhm. Anything more you want to say?
I'm a good listener. I'm a little overwhelmed by some of the conversation today. Lots to ponder, and I will probably ask more questions than I will make
Sure. Good.
statements.
Good. Fine. Mike Donahue?
Yeah, I live in Wickford, Rhode Island. I got introduced to Forrest by my Peace Corps country director, Charlie Yonkers, who many of you may know, and has stayed a close friend, and enjoyed the conversations I've had with Forrest. And I said it on one of his previous courses. So I'm a retired ag economist, I suppose. I worked on the Eastern Shore quite a bit with some of the chicken companies, 45 years in ag, and just have enjoyed the conversations we've had. Thank you, Forrest.
Where are you?
I'm in Wickford, Rhode Island.
Yeah. Okay.
North Kingstown, Rhode Island, west side of Narragansett Bay, across the bay from Newport.
Yeah. Okay. And Bob?
I'm a retired high school teacher. And before that, I taught for 10 years in high school. But before that, I had 30 years in radio broadcasting.
Oh, wow. What did you teach?
I taught American history, and a favorite of mine, and also dealing with other programs that I wanted to work with the students, and a lot of it had to do with philosophy, since that's what I wound up doing a lot of not teaching, but learning about. And I'm more than willing to listen than to say anything about it. But I find this a very interesting recurrence of the things that I learned, and it was important that the professors who I was working with made it clear to me that I should put this into my lessons as much as possible, regardless of age. Working with the kids, and I think it worked. I think talking that way philosophically for kids who are 15, 16, 17, 18, a lot can be gleaned. And I think it's worth it. Berkeley, I don't know Berkeley, but the others I've had some experience with and in teaching, and I just, it's an interesting thing. I want to sort of, well, I'm talking too much. I'm just trying to get it back together again and think about it. So
Lovely. I should say that, I would say that it's maybe now 30 years ago, that some philosophers were beginning to argue for courses in elementary school in philosophy. And there's a whole committee in the philosophy divisions that focuses on teaching, having courses in philosophy for younger people.
Absolutely.
Okay, wow, gee, what a good start. You all go away kind of thinking, what was that all about? So we'll get together next week, but next week we'll start at 10 o'clock because we just heard from Trina, who manages these things, that we can do that. And I'll have that song about meeting in Berkeley Square ready for the very beginning next year. So as you check in, you will hear Frank Sinatra singing about the angel, the nightingale, the nightingale singing in Berkeley Square. Berkeley Square. That's how it's. Okay, see you next week.
Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you very much, Boris.
All of you.
Thank
Be
you.
with you.